Ultimately, the violence committed by the oppressor is not the same as the violence committed by the oppressed. They all know this. Piers Morgan, they know this. Proof that they know it is they always want to start the clock at the action of the response by the oppressed. They always want to start it at 7th of October because they try and invert who is the oppressor and who is the oppressed. They want to do that on purpose so that they can misrepresent who the oppressor is.
Everybody knows that between 1947 and 1948, an immense injustice was perpetrated upon the Palestinian people, that being the Nakba and the creation of the State of Israel in the way that it was. What people may not realize is that in 1947, another injustice was perpetrated upon the Muslims, that is the dispossession of Muslim Kashmir. We have with us Brother Rohan, who's just written an absolutely fantastic article, if we can go to it, on this, on the Rational Religion website called Palestine and Kashmir, Twin Struggles Against the Muslims. Now, Brother Rohan, can you give us a summary of your argument and what you have given to us in this historical analysis?
Yeah, of course. So as you mentioned, first of all, the point of this was to point out the fact that both of those were injustices committed. And I discussed how that was the case, the discrepancies in regards to how the land was divided and what happened. But also trying to sort out what the links were between both of these conflicts as well.
Yeah, like a symmetry.
Exactly, and symmetry. Right. And the main link was not being discovered by me or written by me. It was actually by the second Caliph of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Hazrat Mirza Bashir Uddin Mahmud Ahmed, who was the son of the promised Messiah, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmed, peace be upon him. And he discusses in an article that he wrote literally at the time, within the week that the formation of Israel took place, he wrote an article called Al-Kufrun Millatun Wahida, meaning the disbelievers are one nation. That's what the English meaning is.
Okay.
And within this, he discusses what he had been warning the people about for a very, very long time. But the reason why I say that is he'd written many articles before this as well, which are often overlooked. Yeah. We'll go into those as well.
So there's a bit of an irony here, which is that, the Ahmadi Muslims like us are often called, you've got to forbid, non-Muslims. People say that we don't champion the cause of Muslims. Actually, we've been championing the cause of Muslims while the Muslim leaders in the Muslim countries were in the pocket of the Western nations, right? So, for instance, we won't go through all this now, but at the beginning of your article, you have this beautiful narration and narrative of how Sir Hazrat Chaudhry Muhammad Zafrullah Khan defended the Palestinian cause in the UN and was known as the best defender of the Palestinian cause. And the second Caliph, under whose guidance he operated, published many of these articles. But now we come to this time when it's actually already been done. The decisions have been made. The Muslims have not been united. They have not defended the Palestinians and the Kashmiris. So what does he say?
So, and I quote, he wrote, this was published in Al-Fazl newspaper, a publication of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. And he says, the day that the Holy Quran and the Hadith, the sayings of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, had warned about centuries ago, the day which the Torah and the Bible had warned about, that day which had been described as being exceptionally painful and dreadful for Muslims has, it seems, finally arrived. And he says, Jews are again being settled in Palestine. The United States and the Soviet Union, who are ready to cut each other's throats, appear to be strange bedfellows on this issue. And the odd thing is that both of them also agreed on the issue of Kashmir. They both supported the Indian Union, and now they both favor the Jews on the Palestinian issue.
Okay.
So there's several things that he's pointing out here. One, that this was always prophesied to happen, that these are things that
warned to happen,
exactly. But he specifically calls out or points out two groups here, or two nations in that sense, which is the US, the United States, and the Soviet Union.
Now, then you go on to say these are part of the two entities that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, referred to as Gog and Magog. The reference was to two nations, was to nations that will be divided on the basis of two economic systems, capitalism and communism. Now, to a lot of our Muslim brothers and sisters watching, they'll be very surprised by this. To them, Gog and Magog are these two monsters that are going to be swimming over waves. It's going to be very dramatic in the latter days, and they're going to be teaming up with a giant called the Antichrist, and they're going to fight the Muslims. We have a very different view of this. Can you guys elaborate on the Ahmadiyya view of Gog and Magog and Antichrist and summarize it? We've spoken about this before, so we'll link that
I'll
below.
try to be really succinct.
Yeah.
Antichrist is Dajjal. Dajjal means the great liar. The great lie that's mentioned in the Quran is that Jesus is the Son of God. So the Antichrist does not represent an individual. It represents a nation who would proselytize, who would preach Christianity and force it upon the entire world, which is what the British did. Okay, so we, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, who are accused of being agents of the British, actually regard as the Antichrist, the religion of Christianity, which is proselytized principally by the European nations throughout the Reformation period up until the British Empire. Okay,
Right.
so that's a simple explanation. And the turning away of Muslims and people towards the idolatry of Jesus is actually the Antichrist belief, because it's Antichrist, Christos. Okay, it's Christ's original message, which he was a humble prophet of God.
Yeah.
So it is against his message,
Yeah.
therefore, that he should be deified. First thing. Gog and Magog refer to the political, economic, and military aspects of this nation, which
Yeah.
would spread the Christian movement.
Okay.
Okay, and that refers to the original Arabic words are Ya'juj and Ma'juj, both of which derive from the term Ajij, which means fire. So it means those nations which would operate and their civilization would be built upon fire, right? Fire is their means of transportation, fire is their means of war, fire is their means of industry. Okay, and Ya'juj and Ma'juj refer to two different aspects or economic systems, as you've very aptly put in this article.
people's blocks.
People's blocks. There's capitalism and communism. So capitalism is Magog, and communism was Gog. And the reason we know this is because it says in the Bible that the chief princes of Gog are Mesek and Tubal. And the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community explained that these refer to Moscow and Tobolsk, which were the two princely states of the Soviet Union. Now
Of
that
historic Russia.
of historic Russia. So now that the Soviet Union has collapsed,
Yeah.
Gog is gone.
Yeah.
There is no Gog anymore. A lot of people don't understand this. They think that Russia will eternally be Gog. No, Gog was the system of communism, which has been destroyed. Now there is only Magog,
And Ezekiel talks about how God will destroy Gog, and we have a whole video on this, which we'll link.
which we will not go into depth again because it was long.
We've got several videos on that actually.
Yeah, that's right. So that's the potted history.
Well, and that also ties into the prophecies. You know, Muslims have heard about the Dajjal, the Antichrist will have a donkey that will be giant, and he'll be able to fly like the clouds, and he'll be able to go over the seas, and one leg will be this hemisphere and the next. And actually, when you look at it in light of modern technology, you'll understand that if the Dajjal is sort of Western civilization and its cultural and religious aspects, then its donkey, i.e., refers to its means of travel, right? Which means the steam engine and later iterations, and the ships which go carrying huge loads on their back, and the planes which fly in the sky. That's a very quick overview of the Ahmadiyya way of interpreting these prophecies, which makes a lot of sense. And it also chimes with what Muslims feel in their hearts, which is that Dajjal is here. We're under attack. There's a spiritual war going on. Muslims feel this. They know this. This is actually what the prophecies are talking about Gog and Magog. So back to you now. How does that apply in this situation? What did Gog and Magog do, which was somewhat surprising?
So in this case, to this day, what we can see is US is one of Israel's greatest ally. It's the greatest ally of Israel in terms of just not political support, but also financial support in terms of donations that are provided. But at that time, what the second Caliph was trying to tell the Muslims, again, it was a word of warning, is that for instance, for example, Soviet Union is not your ally. The Muslims need to keep this in mind. When the time comes for the destruction or something when the time comes for the destruction of the Muslims, the Soviet Union will always side against them. In the same way that the US will as well. And then in this article, I also make an example here is that, and it relates to Soviet Union and US coming together again. It's a poignant reminder of the Battle of Azab, the Battle of the Confederates,
Right.
where the enemies of the Muslims, which were various tribes and various faith backgrounds, who were enemies amongst themselves, actually came together to fight the Muslims. And this superficial unity, as we've discussed before, is always posed against the believers from the time immemorial. And it was only the strong belief and the faith of the Sahaba, the companions of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and the Holy Prophet, that protected them against them. So now, again, as a Muslim, the second Caliph of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community is coming back to this topic again. And one quote which really sticks out for me in this one, which you guys have probably heard of it before as well. He's like that this is not just an issue for the Arabs or for the Palestine. This is an issue for the whole Muslim community in general. And then this is a matter of faith. This doesn't just relate to any Zaid or Bakr, Tom, Dick or Harry. This is in relation to the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and to Makkah and Medina. So he's urging them. And like I said, he'd been doing it for a long time. So you mentioned earlier how the Caliph of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community is championing the cause of the Muslims. In 1920, I've quoted this article in here as well. In 1920, he wrote an article in regards to the Turkey world.
Yeah.
And it was in regards to the Ottomans and their collapse. While we did not believe that the Ottoman had a legitimate claim to Khilafat, to Caliphate, he still argues and tries to urge the Muslims to uphold the Caliphate because this was one reason that kept them united. And they at that time did not listen to him again. And this was the second, again, warnings were coming up time again and again.
So our Caliph tried to encourage them to keep their Caliph.
Yes, exactly. Even though that Caliph did not thought that we weren't Muslims.
Yeah, because we're here for the interests of the Muslims and for mankind in general, obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I guess it's quite striking that Gog and Magog, these two powerful opposing forces that were so opposed, ended up coming together simply for the aim of trying to destroy Islam. And I guess we've seen that pattern continue. Lots of kind of groups who are completely disunited coming together to try and kind of fight against Islam in a way. And it's quite striking, isn't it, that that's the case.
And I think that's behind a lot of the kind of Judeo-Christian alliance that's come up in the modern day.
Yeah.
Which is this idea that as if that has any kind of historical coherence. The only historical coherence it has is that essentially they are white Western European people, i.e. non-Muslim people, powerful non-Muslims who come together as one block, essentially to fight the Muslims. And I find that culturally, that's still kind of the case. You have a lot of kind of Western commentators, often termed right wing, but they're probably some on the left as well. That's not really true. They're not on the left. But there are many kind of popular right wing commentators who are essentially
What is called the left.
Yeah, when you scratch the surface, anti-Muslim and pro-white Western European American kind of thing.
100%. And we're talking about this day and age. He said this at the same time. In the same article, he writes that why have they united over this? The reason for this is because they feel a threat from Islam, not from Muslim nations, but from the religion itself.
Yeah, because it's ideologically the only game in town now anymore.
Yeah.
Realistically. And I think everybody recognizes this. It's ultimately coming down to secular atheism versus Islam.
Yeah.
That's basically the cultural zeitgeist and this cultural clash that's now emerging since the fall of communism.
And also people don't really have defined principles, values, ideologies anymore they stick to. And I guess people think they do, but then in reality, just whatever societal shifts happen, that's in the end what they go with and what they adopt. And there's all these kind of social movements, political movements that people just latch onto.
Mindfulness.
Yeah, I mean, these things become people's principles, ways of praying, ways of having, so-called spirituality.
Yeah.
And it's just, we're just easily manipulated. And I think Islam there's no other religion that can fight against this. Christianity is declining, everything is declining, but Islam is the only one that has such defined principles, morals, values that can actually fight against this at all.
Well, it has coherence.
Yeah.
And I think, I wouldn't even say, to be honest, in all honesty, the Sunni Muslims and the Shia Muslims, they're losing it as well, actually. And a lot of their coherence is falling apart. And it's actually because they a simple example is their views on apostasy.
Yeah.
Right. And the fact that they believe apostates should be killed. So if you leave Islam, you should be killed. Okay, not as individuals. Individuals shouldn't kill you. We need a Muslim state to kill you. Oh, well, that just makes me feel so much better. Okay, right.
We're going to organize into a fascist theocracy and then we'll kill you. Do you feel comforted?
Yes, that's perfectly put. And that is a good example of how they've deviated from Islam. That's completely contrary to the Quran. Completely contrary to the Quran. But because they've deviated from Islam and they've adopted a medieval fascist theocratic position, on that issue, they lose all moral credibility.
Yeah.
Right. And they also lose all moral coherence. So in any issue where they deviate from Islam, to that extent they deviate from it, to that extent they lose their moral coherence and credibility, and they no longer become a bulwark for true morals, for true peace, for true establishment of the necessary values for society to thrive.
But also we live in a time of rationality, logic as well. And our claim is that Islam is the only religion that can provide that rationality, that can actually satisfy people's hearts on a logical basis. And I think, as we were discussing with Gog and Magog and Dajjal, that the Sunni and Shia belief is so irrational, it's so ridiculous, that they take these evidently spiritual traditions, sayings of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and they make them as if it's some kind of joke, and it's ridiculous. And so I guess that's the purpose of rational religion in a way, to help people understand that actually religion can be practiced rationally and it can be aligned with people's hearts, but also people's minds.
We haven't discussed the Kashmir issue much at all. Could we do so?
Yeah, we can do so.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can come back to this as well. So one of the names you mentioned earlier was Chaudhry Muhammad Zafrullah Khan.
Yeah.
Literally at the same time this Palestine issue was going on, and he was debating this at the UN.
Yeah.
He was also at the UN debating the Kashmir issue.
Right.
And he was actually debating from a representative from the Indian side who was there. Like you mentioned earlier, that there was injustice in forming Kashmir as well, which was the fact that the decision upon who Kashmir belongs to was passed on to the Maharaja, or the king, or at the time,
Right.
who himself was a Hindu. He wasn't a Muslim or anything. But the population of Kashmir was around 77% Muslim at the time.
Yeah.
So the decision being laid upon a Hindu to divide a majority Muslim population, and he was to decide whether they were part of Pakistan, the Muslim nation,
Yeah.
or part of India.
Yeah.
And and he as well at the time, he did not want to let go of his power, right? He wanted to keep Kashmir as a separate as well. But the Indians moved in with the army, and they convinced him to move towards India. And then that triggered their first Indo-Pak war
Right.
in 1947, literally right December 1947.
Oh, wow. Was that early?
Yeah, it was quite early on. And that's when Chaudhry Muhammad Zafrullah Khan then started arguing for the Kashmir case. One thing I found really common here in nowadays, the case for Hamas
Yeah.
and the militants who are fighting at the time in Kashmir. Chaudhry Muhammad Zafrullah Khan made a case at the UN where the Indians were saying that Pakistan is causing militants or kind of firing them up to fight against the Indian army. They should stop this, right? And Chaudhry Muhammad Zafrullah Khan Sahib says that Pakistan's not doing no such thing.
Yeah.
If some of their soldiers are returning back home to their residence and they're finding their families, their homes destroyed, of course they're going to be angry and triggered by this. You do not expect them to just sit around at home and just allow your aggressive behavior to be ignored.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the root cause
Yeah. Wow.
is the aggression that's being caused from your side, and not from the soldiers that are retaliating, or the militant or the local people that are retaliating, fight against you.
The militancy is a response to the
Exactly.
oppression that's occurring.
You can't force them. You can't tell us to tell them to stop when you're the ones causing the aggression against them.
1940s, Piers Morgan. Do you condemn the Kashmiri militants?
That's exactly what it is. And this is in common day as well, where people are saying that the response that the Zionists or the IDF have done against Hamas is going to trigger a further response.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course it is.
And
Hamas, they can kill all of Hamas as they are now. They'll recruit a whole new generation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even research shows that majority of Hamas fighters are orphans.
Right.
Oh, really?
In the background. And
Majority.
majority of them.
Wow. That's shocking.
So
You're
how
6 years old, your parents get killed, your sister gets killed, your grandparents get killed,
Yeah.
you live as an orphan for the next 15 years. Guess what you're going to do?
And in 2010 National Peace Symposium speech, which just came back to my mind right now, His Holiness, the current Caliph of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, made this exact point. That when you see your family being killed in front of you, your homes being destroyed, your brothers, your sisters, your parents being gone, and what do you expect the response from these children will be afterwards? You cannot blame them for the monsters that you've created them.
Yeah.
Turn them into.
I wouldn't even call them. I really wouldn't. I wouldn't call them monsters because they are having a human reaction.
Yeah.
And before you condemn a people who are oppressed,
Yeah.
you have to stop the hand of the oppressor.
Yeah.
That's the reality. Before you even address the people who are oppressed and you say, stop your oppression that you're doing in response, which they are. And for example, the taking of hostages from innocent civilians is not an Islamic behavior. It's an unacceptable Islamic behavior. It's an unacceptable un-Islamic behavior, I should say.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, before you address that,
Yeah.
you have to stop the hand of the primary oppressor first.
Yeah.
Once the hand of the primary oppressor is stopped, then you turn to the oppressed and say, that's now stopped now. Now you should stop in any oppression you've been responding with.
Yeah.
That's the only just solution here.
Yeah, and as the Caliph of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community has said time after time, is that you will only have peace if you actually have justice.
Yeah.
And it's tragedy upon tragedy, because then the people who are orphaned and they end up in these militant organizations, they do commit sometimes what we can call
Heinous acts.
heinous acts and atrocities. And they, especially tragic, they do it in the name of Islam, whereas Islam does not allow you to kind of take hostages for the sake of bargaining when they're just innocent civilians, or they're civilians at least, and they're non-combatants, or to fire upon non-combatants. Islam doesn't allow that. But like you said, if you were to condemn them, you need to condemn the actual oppressors in the situation 100 times before you condemn the victims who are lashing back out in defense as they perceive it, and somewhat reasonably, of their people.
Because ultimately the oppression committed by the oppressor, or the violence committed by the oppressor, is not the same as the violence committed by the oppressed. And you know what? They all know this. Piers Morgan and the rest, they know this, that there's a difference in the violence, there's a qualitative difference in the violence of an oppressed people in response to the violence of the oppressor. And the proof that they know it is they always want to start the clock at the action of the response by the oppressed. They always want to start it at 7th of October because they try and invert who is the oppressor and who is the oppressed. They want to do that on purpose so that they can misrepresent who the oppressor is.
But I guess the question now for the Muslims is, if Gog and Magog are here, and if the Antichrist is here and the Muslims are being punished, then where is the Messiah? Where is the Messiah who is supposed to come to fight the Gog and Magog and the Antichrist? So what's our view on that, just for those who may not know?
So our view on that is that the Messiah has come, and the Messiah was named Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace be upon him, who came in the 19th century, and he died in 1908. But we believe that he was a sort of a messianic Jesus-like figure to essentially rescue the Muslim world from its current disunity, disharmony, violence, terrible beliefs, lack of faith, materialism, all of these things. And basically, spiritually arm people, the Muslims, in order to fight back against Gog and Magog and the Dajjal. So he wrote, 60 books of extraordinarily coherent logic, rationality, 90 books, with absolutely astonishing levels of insight and detail into the material and spiritual worlds, and really gave the Muslims back their spirituality, enabled people to understand that God still speaks now as he has always done. And so really helped Muslims to understand that.
And understanding who the Messiah is, what the Messiah is actually at the root of the solution here. Because the Quran clearly says that the Gog and Magog will be such a force that it will encompass everything. They shall hasten forth from every height. That's what it mentions. So the Muslims will have nowhere to hide.
And the Messiah in the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is told not to fight them. You're not supposed to fight them.
The fourth Caliph of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Hazrat Mirza Tahir Ahmed, he also did a series of sermons which have been published in the form of a book, The Gulf Crisis, that he wrote about.
The Gulf Crisis and the New World Order.
Yes, the Gulf Crisis and the New World Order. That's the important part, and he talks about the same issue as well. And he firstly talks about the interest that these nations have come together and taken against the Muslim world. We discussed this already, but he says the difference between why they feel a threat is because a lot of these nations, they're formed upon ideologies. For example, communism for Russia or Zionism for Israel, right? And this creates divides based on racial or ideological boundaries, whereas Islam completely transcends this. It removes all those boundaries and it creates this totalizing aspect, which gives a guideline of life from the individual person to a nation at large, which is what they lack. And they feel threatened by this, right? Because at the end of the day, the US and the Soviet Union can come together and be like, do this against the Muslims. But when they go back to their homes and the differences they have amongst each other, they will come and play. And we saw that in the Cold War until 40, 50 years later.
See that even post-Cold War, which is that even when they're all under the same capitalist system, the Americans in particular are still vindictive against the Russians, basically because of the fact that they are Russians and they're not Americans and the Americans need to dominate. You're absolutely right, because Islam is that belief system that allows you to transcend your kind of demographic identity. And as you said, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, set up this community, and through his prayers and his spiritual purification, he allowed us to continue that and transmit that through the generations. So when people of Muslim background or non-Muslim background become Ahmadi Muslims, they're able to join something which transcends borders and boundaries, because it's a spiritual kingdom. It's not a physical one. So our community exists in hundreds of all the countries basically of the world, right? And it doesn't matter where you're from, male, female, whatever your job is. Actually, Islam is that thing which can be adhered to whoever you are. And I think that's what's so threatening to all of these specific ideologies.
And we mentioned an example earlier of the Ottoman Empire. This is actually a good example for this, because the reason why the Turk tribes unified so easily was because of their common belief of faith, belief in one God. And their destruction was caused because they started to adopt nationalistic tendencies of looking after their own people. The Arabs wanted their own thing, the Palestinian Arabs wanted their own thing, the Turkish people wanted their own thing, and then that's what eventually caused their downfall within themselves.
The Muslims seem to have never really understood this point, that the ethnicity, or they have.
No, they did early on.
They did initially understand it, but in recent modern history, they seem to have relegated their Islamic identity and subjugated it to ethnic identities.
Yeah.
And Islam is not such a religion that is totalizing in the sense that it erases national identities, national cultures, and national traditions. But what it does do is it helps people understand and contextualize their national identities into a broader narrative of them as the same of creation of the same creator.
Yeah.
So those national identities do not become means of division; they become means of identifying people's unique characteristics and the beauties amongst different peoples, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, so they don't. It's almost like something that without God, the ethnic identities, the national identities become a pathology.
Right.
They become a means of pitting one community against another community.
Yeah.
But in the context of the servants of God, they become a means of beauty and adornment of mankind, that this community have these characteristics, this community has this characteristic. And it's not a means for destruction amongst us.
Yeah.
It's
As
a
it
means
says in the Quran as well.
It's exactly
that I've created you in tribes so that you may recognize each other.
that you may
Yeah.
recognize your qualities and your characteristics, that I've spread my attributes, the manifestation of my attributes differentially amongst you. You know, the Japanese have created the martial arts. For example, I've been studying martial arts, as you know, today. I was amazed. It's a strange example, but I was thinking to myself, it's so strange that all the martial arts seem to have come from one point in the world.
I don't think it's just Japan, but it's East Asia.
East Asia, the whole Thailand, but they've all come from that region. That's a beautiful thing about their culture, right? That martial system of self-defense that spread to the world through them, right? Now, that's not something that's a beautiful aspect of them. That's what it means to recognize one another. You recognize each nation has their attributes, their qualities, their excellences.
Yeah.
But despite their differences, their belief in the one God unifies them. Exactly.
right.
This is the important part.
Sorry.
And I was going to come back to the solution actually. And Hazm al-Tahrim in the same book, straight away after that, he talks about a prophetic tradition of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he discusses at the time of the Messiah and his companions will be besieged. They will be attacked or engulfed or surrounded by Gog and Magog, right? And what will they do? They will go up to Mount Tur. Tur. So a lot of the Muslims would know this narration. It's a hadith, a saying of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, quoted in Sahih Muslim. And there what they will do is, so they will flee from Gog and Magog. They won't stand and fight there.
Yeah.
But what we'll do is when they go up to Mount Tur, they will fight in another way. What they will do is they'll besiege God to help them.
Yeah.
And they will pray to him.
Yeah.
And that is when God will speak to them and support them as well in that sense.
Yeah.
And what Hazm al-Tahrim says, and I'll quote, he says, the Holy Prophet, referring to the latter days, prophesied Gog and Magog will rule the world and they will rise wave after wave and the whole world will be overwhelmed by the waves of their power. At that time, the Messiah will be raised in the world and the Messiah with his followers will try to fight them and will attempt to counter them. Allah will then speak to the Messiah saying that no man in the world has been granted the power to fight these two nations which we have created, not even you. There's only one way, that you seek shelter on a mountain and pray to God. It is only the weapon of prayer that can subjugate these nations. And this is the important aspect as well of what the promise of Messiah explained. And why we discussed the coming of the Messiah is because through the acceptance of this, you understand these things. Firstly, who Gog and Magog is. As a Muslim, or the Prophet Zafrullah Ahmad has given us a true understanding, and how to protect yourself against them as well.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all purely from Sahih Muslim.
Yeah.
You know, ascend the mountain to Mount Tur, pray and your prayers will melt them like salt is dissolved in water. That's the words of Allah, right? So that's, and the fourth Caliph explained perhaps it was not in that book, but in his Dars al-Quran, he mentioned that the meaning of ascending the mountain of Mount Tur means become lost in the example of the companions and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
He was referred to as a mountain.
Who is referred to as the mountain in the Quran.
And, you know, you can see why this is a threat to the right and the left, because they can't get beyond demographics and identity politics.
Yeah.
Both the right and the left. The right tend to be based on race and the left tend to be based on other qualities. You know, it's all about identity in that sense, but it's not really about actually your underlying beliefs.
Yeah.
And Islam actually liberates you from a lot of these things. You
Yeah,
know, the circumstance of your birth.
And we've discussed this so many times now, but there's in a sense of type of subjugation of Muslim nations by foreign entities is a point of reflection as well. And you often say that when a spiritual kingdom is established, it's accompanied by a worldly kingdom after that. The spiritual kingdom must be established first, though. So the Muslim nations must reflect over why they have lost this worldly kingdom, which was established after the coming of Islam, of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him.
Because they lost their spiritual kingdom.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, brothers. We will be covering more issues soon. Please do like, comment, and subscribe. Check out rationalreligion.co.uk, where we have all of our content categorized by topic. Make sure you sign up to our mailing list and follow us on social media. Let us know what you thought of today's discussion. We'll be happy to monitor the comments, but not necessarily respond. Okay, peace be upon you.
Now, the people of Iraq, Afghanistan are reacting in their own way to these acts in response. It was a presumption that if action was not taken against those in power, then there would be a grave threat to world peace. And so action was taken to preserve the rights of the people. But on the other hand, was similar effort not required to protect the Palestinians from external attacks? Even if we suppose that the Palestinians initiated the war, such a disproportionate punishment could never be justified, whereby innocent children, women, elders, and the unarmed are bombarded indiscriminately. An entire city is reduced to rubble. The Western media raised a great outcry, no doubt. And although the superpowers issued statements, no concrete step were taken to stop Israel from continuing this cruelty. Can those innocent children who saw their homes being destroyed, who saw their brothers and sisters being killed without any reason, who saw their helpless parents targeted whilst pleading for their lives, can those innocent children ever erase those horrific scenes from their memories? Their inner frustration will make them anxious. And when this anxiety is manifested, it will result in further disorder, and that will lead to a reaction to check it. And as is evident from the history of Palestine, such a reaction will, of course, lead to further cruelty on them. In today's world, when an event occurs in one place, it is broadcast instantaneously throughout the world as a consequence of witnessing images of such cruelty. Muslims will no doubt develop hatred, and such hatred will continue to increase. Malice and grudges in people's heart will multiply. There is already talk of cruelty being repeated. Let us see what steps these major powers take to prevent this happening.